I am the founder and director of the San Antonio Black International Film Festival. I'm just curious, how many people knew there was a San Antonio Black International Film Festival? Let me get a show of hands. Okay, good. So now those of you who are here, now you know. So definitely mark your calendars, save the dates. We're the first weekend in October. This is our 6th year. And so we're going to be October 4th through 6th this year. We're only doing 3 days this year, and then next year we're going to come back with a 4-day festival with the bells and whistles and everything. But I want to thank you all again for coming out. I'm joining today with our partners, Melanize Media, who have consistently done great things in San Antonio. They have the bus tour, they do Black history classes and courses. Merging with them with this particular event was important because we're really trying to get a mark on conscious raising type of programming to San Antonio. Programming that makes you go away feeling good and learning something in the process. Just having impact and having a great experience in everything. So we are so excited to bring Brother Anthony T. Browder to San Antonio. I first met him and really became exposed to him when I was in Washington, D.C. I went to Howard, and of course that's his base. And so he has done amazing things. And we are gonna have an awesome time tonight, so I just wanna make sure that everybody is ready and open for that. Before we get started with our program, I wanna just first say that this is a 2-day event. So today is here at the Carver's lecture talk, and then tomorrow we are just so honored to have the premiere film that Tony produced with his good friend and mine, Brother Dr. Runoko Rashide, who's also a renowned Egyptologist historian. So he passed away in 2021 on a tour in Egypt. So Anthony Browder actually produced a documentary on his life, and it's called Global Assistant, and the life and the times of Dr. Runoko Rashide. And this will be playing at the Carver Library tomorrow. So this is a 2-day thing, so he'll be there for Q&A after. So if you didn't get your book signed today, you're welcome to come to the library tomorrow. He'll also be signing books there. If we have time toward the end, because our out is 9, so if we have time toward the end, we can sign books, but if not, he'll be available tomorrow at the library. Before we get started with our actual presentation, I'd like to bring Andar Mayat, who is one of the co-founders of Melanize Media, and we're going to start with libation, and he'll explain that, and then we'll continue forward. Thank you.
Hotel, peace, greetings. First, just want to say thank you all for being here, and truly, we look beautiful. I'm including myself in the picture. But what I want to do in opening up for this evening's program is do what we call libations. But basically, what we do with libations is a way to acknowledge the Creator and the ancestors. Because wherever we go, we take that creative force with us, and we take our ancestors with us. And we should always pause, acknowledge the Creator and ancestors, invite them to be with us, and then all things will be good. Are y'all with me? Yeah. All right. So on this wonderful occasion, I think it's appropriate first and foremost is to give thanks to the Creator, the sustainer and the maker of all life, for the great gift of life. Because truly we've been blessed. We are living. Ashe? And then we want to thank the Creator for our ancestors, those who have come before us, who lived, loved, and labored for us, truly leaving us a great legacy of service, struggle, and sacrifice. They are examples for us. On this occasion, I think it's appropriate that we raise up One, Dr. John Henry Clark, who's one of our great historian master teachers. Dr. Clark was told that the missing pages of world history is Black history, and he committed his life to uncovering those pages and sharing it with the world. And truly, we've been blessed because his writing is still with us, his lectures are with us. And if you ever want to know more about ourselves as Black people, I invite you to explore Dr. John Henry Clark knowledge. And we raise him up and we say Ashe. Another one is Dr. Runoko Rashid, truly a great historian, author, and speaker. Do you know that Dr. Runoko Rashid traveled to more than 126 countries, 85 museums all over the world? And why? So he could document the African presence in the world. Are y'all with me? I'm talking about, that's dedication. That's love. That's saying that I want to give my people something, and I'm going to go out and research it and document it and bring it back and share it. So we raise up Dr. Runoko Rashid and we say Ashe. We raise up Dr. Asa Hilliard, our great historian and educational psychologist. Family, do you know Dr. Asa Hilliard did all this research, taking brothers and sisters to Africa? And I know Brother Anthony Browder will raise him up. But the fact is, he wrote a book, and we have the book. He wrote a number of books. But one thing he said, we must regain control over the primary education and socialization of our children. That's profound and true, and it should push us. But we raise up Dr. Asa Hilliard and we say Ashe. We raise up Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, a warrior queen, renowned psychiatrist. She researched and documented the root of racism, white supremacy, and was a strong advocate for the Black family. She said, I will not rest until Black children are taught to love themselves. We raise up Dr. Frances Cress Welsing and we say Ashe. Family, in raising up our ancestors, we raise up the best in ourselves because we are an extension of our ancestors. Now, there's one last thing I want to do, and that is to ask our elders, all those who are 70 and above, please stand, if you would. 70 and above. Now, don't sit down. I just want to say one word. And that is to say, now family, look around. These are wise elders. And I'm going to tell you how I know they're wise. Because they still here learning. And that's the sign of a wise person. Because as long as we're on this earth, we should be learning. And the last thing we're going to do is ask our elders permission to go forward with this program. Ask them for their blessings so we can get started. Are y'all ready? So, elders, do we have permission to go forward with this program? We have been granted permission, and we thank our elders. Now, with that family, we have done what is right and just, and now it's time to get ready for this journey. So, I'm going to bring out Sister Ada. She's going to introduce our speaker, our scholar, our master teacher, cultural historian, and we're going to take a journey through time. All right? Thank you, family.
Thank you. I want to, before I get started, just send out thank you, special thanks. I mean, we kind of just brought this together upon our own. We did get a small mini grant from the Humanity Texas, but we also had support from the NAACP San Antonio chapter, Joanne Harris, Liberation Academy, and just everyone who actually donated online. We thank you for this, for bringing this together. Anthony T. Browder is an author, a publisher, and cultural historian, and an educational consultant. He also considers himself a cultural memory specialist. He is a graduate from Howard University's College of Fine Arts and has lectured extensively throughout the United States and 5 continents on issues related to African and African American history and culture. He's the founder of IKG Resource Center, and we do have that rolling in the back so you can scan the QR codes and find out more information. So IKG Cultural Resource Center in Washington, D.C., has devoted 44 years researching ancient Egyptian history, science, philosophy, and culture. He has traveled to Egypt 65 times since 1980 and is currently the director of the ASA Restoration Project, named after Asa Hilliard. And that is, he's actually currently funding an excavation and a restoration of 3 25th Dynasty tombs in Kushite and noblemen of West Bank of Luxor in Kemet. Browder is the first African American to fund and coordinate an archaeological dig in Egypt, or Kemet, and has conducted 23 archaeological missions in Egypt since 2009. That is amazing. His 4 decades of study have led him to the conclusion that ancient Africans were the architects of civilization and developed the rudiments of what has become the scientific, religious, and philosophical backbone of mankind. It is from this framework that IKG has concentrated its research and disseminated its findings. So I would like to welcome you all to the author of 6 publications, which are used in classrooms throughout the world. And we are so honored to be a part of added to his lecture series, because he has lectured extensively throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome Anthony T. Browder. Give him a round of applause.
Good evening. And how are you all? You look phenomenal. I am so pleased to be here. This is my first time presenting in San Antonio, and it's nice to be in a city that's named after me. How about that? I want to thank Sister Ada and Brother Andor for making this evening possible. Whenever we do a program such as this, a lot of work goes on behind the scenes that most of us aren't aware of. And it's important to acknowledge those people who make events such as these happen. I can get out of this PowerPoint, we can move on. And it's important to be able to make activities like these possible, to promote them so that people can come out and attend, and to have technicians assist us to make sure that everything works like it's supposed to. And matter of fact, I can do it this way. All right, good. Thank you, sir, I appreciate it. And I want to just jump into the presentation. I have a lot of things that I want to talk about, a lot of information I want to share with you. And I believe in using my time judiciously. So let me just jump into it, share my information, and then we will have time at the end of my presentation for a Q&A. Does that sound good? Yes. Excellent. But then let's get started. So as was mentioned in my introduction, I have been traveling to Africa for 44 years now, and 67 of those trips have been to Egypt. I visited numerous countries on the continent, and all of this work has allowed me to do what I love to do. You know, there's an old saying that if you do what you love to do, you never have to work a day in your life. Well, I have not been working for the past 45 years. You know, so I'm honored to have these opportunities to travel around the world and share my love with others so that I can spread the love to you all. Information history is so profoundly significant. And I want to share with you some of the people who put me on this path, because my capacity to share my love for African history with you extends beyond myself. I'm an extension of those scholars, those ancestors, those souls who came before me. And just as was done with the libation beforehand, we all need to understand that we are here because someone else opened the door for us. And I want to acknowledge 3 door openers for me. The first was Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who 47 years ago today made me aware of something that I didn't learn in elementary school, high school, or college. And that was that the ancient Egyptians were black. He was at Georgetown Law School, gave a presentation on his then newest publication that came before Columbus, The African Presence in America, presented profound information documenting the fact that Africans from the Nile Valley built ships, navigated the Nile River, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Atlantic Ocean, and came to this continent numerous times, at least 2,500 years before Christopher Columbus was born. And he provided documentation to substantiate that fact. I was honored to have been able to travel to Mexico with Van Sertima in 90 and 91 to see the physical African presence in America. So Van Sertima made me aware of the fact that I had been miseducated. Even though I had attended predominantly black schools all of my life, had been taught by teachers who loved me, I came to realize that people only know what they know. And if you have not been taught the truth, you cannot teach the truth. So Van Sertima put me on the path. John Henry Clark was a beautiful soul who I loved dearly, who illuminated the path for me. And once I was on that path led me straight to Asa G. Hilliard. So I'm here doing the things that I love to do because of these 3 African men that I love dearly. It was, Dr. Clark was the founding president of the African Heritage Studies Association. That was the organization which was founded in 1968, 1969. That was the organization that was partially responsible for developing black studies in colleges and universities throughout the United States of America. It was also that organization that was responsible for expanding Negro History Week to Black History Month. Dr. Carver was also one of the founding presidents of ASCAC, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. Asa Hilliard is the son of Texas. Asa Hilliard was also one of the founders of ASCAC, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization, and he was also one of the sponsors of the Nile Valley Conference. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Nile Valley Conference. Van Sertima was another scholar who worked with Asa and Dr. Charles Finch to organize the Nile Valley Conference, which was held in Atlanta, Georgia, 1984. I attended that conference. And those 4 days that I spent in Atlanta at that conference changed my life forever. As I watched scholar after scholar after scholar present information that I had never been introduced to throughout my entire educational process, I said, that's what I want to do. I realized the reason why I was born. And Asa wrote the introduction to my first book, From the Browder File, in 1989. Dr. Clark wrote the introduction to my second book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, in 2000. When did I write that book? A lifetime ago. I had hair when I wrote that book. It's been so long ago. And in 92 is when I wrote Nile Valley Contributions. And then Dr. Van Sertima, who was the editor of the Journal of African Civilizations, did a review of Nile Valley in one of his publications. So these brothers are responsible for opening the door for me and making it possible for me to do all the things that I've done. The Nile Valley Conference was held at Morehouse College, September 26th through the 30th, 1984. Phenomenal scholars from various disciplines over the course of 4 days presented profound information about Nile Valley culture and civilization. And the highlight of that event was to have been the appearance of Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop. Unfortunately, he was not able to come because of technical problems with his plane, but the entire conference was centered around the work of Sheikh Anta Diop. And Diop was famous for making the statement which you see on the screen now, in which he said the history of Black Africa will remain suspended in air and cannot be written correctly until African historians dare to connect it to the history of Egypt. Van Sertima and his protege Sheikh Jacques at the Cairo Symposium in 1974 literally changed the face of Egyptology by presenting phenomenal information that was never disclosed to the public. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that ancient Egypt was an indigenous African civilization, and none of that information was made available to the light of day to the general public. So we talk about this information because we have to honor these men and women who dedicated their lives to sharing information which is so sorely needed. Dr. Jacques did come to Atlanta the following year, where he was presented an honorary degree at Morehouse. He went back to Senegal, and then he died the next year. So, I see what happened. I see what happened. For some reason, okay, we'll move on. Because a couple of slides that I put here in this presentation are not here, but we're going to move forward. Okay, we're going to move forward. So, Nile Valley is important because we think about Egypt, we talk about Egypt all the time, but we have to see Egypt in the context of the Nile Valley. Egypt is just one of several countries that constitute the Nile Valley, and by looking at the geography of Nile Valley, we have a better context for Egypt, what Egypt is, and why Egypt is so critically important. The Nile River Valley is 4,100 miles long. The Nile River is the only river in the world which flows from south to north. So here's a map that's going to be in a forthcoming publication that I'm working on that shows you the Nile Valley. Now, some of you may say, well, this map appears to be upside down. No, the map is not upside down. Our perception of the world is upside down. See, because in the Nile Valley, water follows gravity, and water flows from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. That's the reason why the northern part of Egypt is referred to as Lower Egypt, and the southern part is called Upper Egypt. The lower part, the northern part of Kush is called Lower Kush, and the southern part of Kush is called Upper Kush. The south is the higher elevation. In the Nile Valley, the Africans who lived along the Nile Valley, the south is up and north is down. The reason why we see the world differently now is because of a Flemish cartographer by the name of Mercator, who in the 15th century produced the maps that are in all of our classrooms. And because of the fact he was European, he placed Europe in the center of the world. He put Europe at the top. So if you're a map maker, you determine where the top is and where the bottom is. If you travel to Australia and look at maps in Australia, you'll see that Australia is at the top in the world, everybody else is at the bottom. Maps give you the power to control reality. And whoever creates the maps and teaches you geography determines your perception of reality. So it's so critically important for us to reclaim the Nile Valley as an important aspect of African culture and civilization. So when we look at, so here's a map that shows Africa as viewed by African people in the Nile Valley. And here's another map that shows you the terrain of the Nile Valley, where you see it moves, the Nile River moves from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. There are two sources of the Nile River. The White Nile comes out of Uganda, from Lake Nyanza. That was the lake that a British European, renamed Lake Victoria. See, when you make maps, when you discover other people, you name them after yourselves. That's why it's important for people to name themselves and write their own history, or else they will be written out of their own history. As I was talking to some students in this auditorium this morning, and to drive this point home, I said, can you imagine what the history of Africans in America would look like if it were written by Donald Trump? Can you just imagine that for a second? We wouldn't be in the back of the bus, we'd be underneath the bus. And that's what happens anytime you allow someone else to tell your story. So, another important fact is the Nile flows from south to north. The White Nile comes out of Uganda. The Blue Nile comes out of Lake Tana in Ethiopia. The two Nile rivers meet in Khartoum, and they form the singular Nile River, which flows throughout Sudan, throughout Egypt, and empties into the Mediterranean Sea. So by the time the water from the White Nile gets to Khartoum, 90% of that water has evaporated because of the heat in that portion of Africa, which means that 90% of the water that constitutes the Nile River comes out of Ethiopia. And not only does that water come out of Ethiopia, but Ethiopia is a country that has the richest soil I've ever seen in my life. There's volcanoes all around Ethiopia, and the soil is jet black. It's the most fertile soil I've ever seen. So that soil, that silt, was washed out of Ethiopia into Egypt every year the Nile flood. And when that water flooded in Egypt, it covered the east and the west bank a mile in each direction, deposited that silt, and made Egypt the most fertile land on the continent. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. You could drop $1 in the soil in Egypt and grow a money tree. You know, it's that fertile. Of course, I'm kidding, but you get my drift. Right? So another important scholar is Chancellor Williams, who wrote a book entitled The Destruction of Black Civilization. And in that book, chapter 2 of that book, he references Ethiopia, or Egypt, as Ethiopia's oldest daughter. Chancellor Williams understood that the civilization that we know as Egypt had its origins in Ethiopia. And if you really want to understand ancient Egyptian civilization, you must go to Ethiopia. You must study the history and the culture and the traditions of Ethiopia, because that is the source of that ancient wisdom. As I said, 90% of the water that forms the Nile River comes out of Ethiopia. But what's critically important is that the foundational myth of Kemet comes out of Ethiopia. Kemet is the original name for the country that we now call Egypt. And what most people don't realize is that Egypt is a Greek word. Pyramid is a Greek word. Sphinx is a Greek word. So if you cannot call things that were created by African people in Africa by the names that they gave them, then you don't know what you're talking about. Let me give you one example, just one example. Pyramid, everybody's heard of pyramids, right? But does anyone know what that word pyramid means? Pyramid is a Greek word which means little flat cake, like a pancake. And that word was used by the Greeks when they came into Egypt during the 3rd and 4th century BC. And they saw the ruined pyramid fields in Saqqara. There's a whole host of small pyramids that had all been destroyed by earthquakes. And to the Greeks, they looked like little flat cakes. So, know this. I would dare say that 44 years of studying Egyptian history, 44 years of traveling to Egypt, I can say conservatively that 90% of what we've been taught about Egypt is wrong. There are no tombs. Pyramids are not tombs. No body has ever been found in any pyramid. There's 118 pyramids in Egypt. And no bodies have ever been found in any of them. Pyramids are not tombs. The original name for that structure, which the Greeks call pyramid, is Mir, M-I-R. And the word Mir means the place of ascension. Mir were structures that were placed over tombs. So all of the tombs are in the ground. These structures were like tombstones. A tombstone is not a tomb. It is a marker that identifies where somebody is buried. More specifically, that word Mir means place of ascension. And it was designed specifically to facilitate the ascension of the soul buried in the tomb underneath it into heaven where the soul of that person could be reborn. So in that context, we have contemporary Egyptologists who have ceased using the word pyramid and are now using the word mir, and some are even bold enough, courageous enough to refer to mir as resurrection machines, because that's what they were designed to do, to facilitate the resurrection of a soul buried in the tomb underneath into heaven. And not just any point in heaven, a specific location in heaven where all souls go to be reborn. That's an aspect of this ancient African culture and civilization that's never talked about. But once you begin to look at it from an African context, everything changes. So, moving forward. The foundational mythology of ancient Kemet, which was there at the very beginning, I found out about 20 years ago, actually originated in Ethiopia. So I want to share with you an Ethiopian story that is a fundamental aspect of ancient Egyptian history and culture. It's rooted in the story of three people. Asar, who was the first king of Kemet. Kemet is the original name for the country that the Greeks renamed Egypt in 332 BC. Asar's brother Set, and Heru, who was the son of Asar. Now, I'm not going to go into a long conversation about these three personalities. I can spend 2 hours just talking about these three men. But let me just sum up their presence in the mind of the ancient Kemites by saying that these three men represented life, death, and rebirth. Life, death, and rebirth. And their history, their story, is rooted in over 3,000 years of Kemetic history and culture. And once you understand the history and culture, you would see that this object here in the lower left-hand portion of the screen is an object that was discovered in the 1970s, around 1971, in southern Egypt. It is known as Nabta Playa. This object, which is a series of stones that were found in the desert, this object is the oldest astroarchaeological calendar known to mankind. It was created about 7,000 BC, 3,500 years older than Stonehenge. And it's oriented to the helical rising of two very important star systems. The star system that we refer to today by its Greek name Orion, and the companion star associated with Orion, the star system that we refer to today as Sirius. So, ancient astronomers in the Nile Valley, 9,000 years ago, developed the oldest astrological calendar known to mankind and oriented to the helical rising of the star system Orion, and the rising of the star, the helical rising of the star Sirius. And it's the rising of the star Sirius, the helical rising of the star Sirius, which precedes the annual flooding of the Nile. We have temples in Egypt that tell the story of these three personalities. The image on the lower right is the temple of Edfu, where the story of Heru battling his uncle Set is recorded on the wall in 4 different images. And then the center image is an image of Heru from the temple of Seti I in Abydos. And that's an image of Heru after he reclaimed the throne of his father. Short version of the story. Asar was responsible for unifying the two lands of Upper and Lower Kemet and establishing the first nation state in the history of mankind. He is said to have introduced writing, hieroglyphics, agriculture, and established the first nation state. And then he decided to share his technology with other people within the continent of Africa. But he was murdered by his brother Set, who usurped his power. Asar was murdered, and as I said, it's a long story, but ultimately, Asar was resurrected from the dead. And the symbol that represented the resurrection of Asar is this symbol that you see on the left side of your screen. It's known as the Tekken. We know it better by its Greek name, obelisk. But what I want you all to know, what I want you to understand, is this symbol, the Tekel, is a 6,000-year-old symbol that represents the resurrection of a Tsar, the first documented story in history of the death and resurrection of a person. And this image that was carved above the entrance of every temple in ancient Egypt is called the Badet. And it represented Heru as a falcon after he defeated his uncle Set and reclaimed his father's kingdom. So the image that you see here in the center of the screen is Heru, who is portrayed as a falcon sitting on the throne after he reclaimed his father's kingdom. Very important story. But to give you some context as to why there's a fundamental difference between Kemet and Egypt, I want to share with you this timeline. What we have here is a timeline that depicts the 4 golden ages of ancient Kemet. And what we see at the top of this timeline are images of rulers of ancient Kemet, images that were created during their lifetime. So this is Narmer, who is, according to the documented history of Egypt, he was the first king of ancient Kemet. So these are images that were created during their lifetime, so you can see what they look like. Even though noses are missing sometimes and lips are missing sometimes, you can still tell that you're looking at the faces of African people. So here's Narmer, here is Zoser, the king who was responsible for overseeing the construction of the step pyramid at Saqqara, the first man-made structure of stone. And then we go to the second golden age in the 11th dynasty, Mentuhotep. You can see here, you're looking at the face of an African person. Amenhotep III. Here is Taharqa, representing the 25th dynasty. So I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the founders of ancient Kemet and all of the leaders of the 4 golden ages were indigenous African people. In 332 BCE, Kemet was conquered by the Greeks, Alexander of Macedonia, and the Greeks were responsible for renaming the country Egypt. So here's Alexander. The Greeks ruled Egypt for approximately 300 years before they were conquered by the Romans, and Augustus ruled Egypt. They ruled Egypt for approximately 300 years before the Roman Empire collapsed, and then the Arabs came in 648 and now control the land. So let me share with you another illustration that shows you the difference between Kemet and Egypt. See now, when people talk about ancient Egypt, they don't show you these images. They show you images of Alexander and Cleopatra, non-African people, and they project their history onto the past. That's miseducation. And the thing that's important about Anwar Sadat is that Sadat's mother was Nubian, his father was Arab. And when Sadat became president of Egypt, Sadat said that he was the first true president of Egypt since pharaonic times. He knew his history, he knew his culture. Bear with me one second. I want to check. I did something here with this slide presentation and duplicated my presentation. I want to double check and pull up the original one because I made a few changes that I want to make sure I can share with you all, because I went walking around the city today and I saw some things that blew my mind, and I wanted to share them with you today. And let me just double check and make sure I have everything. I hope I have it. I hope I have it. I hope I have it. I really do hope I have it here. I don't see it. I didn't save it. I guess I didn't save it. But that's okay. I'm going to add to it as we go along, because it's important that I share this information with you. So let me close this out. I don't know why I didn't save it, but that's okay. That is okay. Let me get back here. So, Dr. Carter G. Woodson wrote a book entitled The Miseducation of the Negro. Miseducation is real. And what's even more important is for us to understand that Negroes were not the only people who were being miseducated. Everybody has been miseducated. Everybody has been lied to. And there's a name for this process of miseducation. It's referred to as agnotology, which is the study of culturally induced ignorance or doubt. And there's a lot of that going on right now. Too much, if you ask me. Particularly, it's the publication of inaccurate or misleading scientific data and the creation of institutions to promote disinformation, i.e. universities, museums, foundations, and media corporations are responsible for determining what we know. And we have to examine this process. And what I want to share with you are historical examples of history being intentionally distorted in order to miseducate everyone and change people's perception of historical facts. One of the persons responsible for making the most changes is John D. Rockefeller, who at the turn of last century was one of the wealthiest men in the world. John D. Rockefeller established the University of Chicago in my hometown in 1890. And in 1919, he established the Oriental Institute. He used $1.5 million to establish the Oriental Institute. And what has been the impact of his work and the work of people like him, very wealthy people like him? They have distorted our memory of the past. I'm going to give you 3 examples of 20th century white race men who falsified the history of the world. One is Sir Flanders Petrie, who was an Englishman, phenomenal archaeologist, a brilliant scholar. I'm not going to take that away from him. The methods that he developed for archaeology are still being used today. But Petrie was a racist. Petrie believed that African people were inherently inferior. So as he was excavating tombs in Egypt and finding the bodies of African people, he refused to acknowledge that they were African. Another person is George Reisner. George Reisner worked for Harvard and Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And then the third person in this trilogy of important scholars was James Henry Breaston, who was the founder of the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. Petrie's work was financed in part by the British Museum. And it's important to understand, that many of these museums are now being faced with returning some of the artifacts that they stole from people all over the world. I saw a meme somewhere that said that the British Museum is one of the greatest crime scenes in the world. And just recently, I came across this image, which depicts all of the nations that were colonized by the British. Do you remember when you were in elementary school or high school, do you remember hearing the phrase that the sun never set on the British Empire? That's because the British were responsible for controlling 80% of the planet and the planet's resources. And so to that extent, here's a map that showed you all the countries that were colonized by the British. And this statement that roughly every 6 days, a country somewhere in the world celebrates its independence from Britain. It is the most widely celebrated holiday in the world. The United States of America is a prime example. The United States of America was colonized by who? The British. And thus, what language do we speak? English. Because we were colonized by people from England. Wherever free people go and powerful people go, they bring their language, their history, their culture, their religion, and their traditions, and they impose them on the people that they discover, conquer, and enslave. That's a historical fact. There's a new book out on George Reisner. Reisner worked for the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Reisner worked for Harvard University. Reisner led 23 archaeological excavations in Egypt and Sudan. He was the first archaeologist to excavate in Merowe, the royal tombs of the Cushite kings. And as he was excavating these tombs and finding these bodies of African people, he also found artifacts that he said were too finely crafted to have been created by Negroes. So this ancient civilization must have been a European or non-African civilization. So the author of this book acknowledges Reisner's life was in the context of Western colonialism, racism, and nationalism during a time of British political control of the world, particularly Egypt. So history has to be looked at in the context of the people who control multiple lands. James Henry Breasted, as I said, was the founder of the Oriental Institute. He was given $1.5 million from John D. Rockefeller. And the reason why Rockefeller gave Breasted this money is because Breasted had written a book around 1916, a book called Ancient Times. And in that book, it's a brilliant book, Reisner talked about his studies in Egypt. And in the first edition of Ancient Times, Reisner said that the creators of ancient Egyptian civilization were not unlike the dark-skinned Nubian inhabitants who live in Egypt today. Rockefeller used to read this book to his children every night before they went to bed. And he was so enamored by Breasted's research that he gave her the money to establish the Oriental Institute, but there were strings attached to his money. So in the 1935 revised edition of Ancient Times, Breasted removed all references to Nubians as being the originators of ancient Egyptian civilization. And he added a new chapter in this book that was dedicated to the members of the Great White Race. And this is the map out of this book, which he lays out the quadrant of the world where the Great White Race lived and influenced cultures and civilizations in ancient times. And you see Egypt falls within the dominion of the Great White Race. That's what $1.2 million would do. It would change your brother's mind in a heartbeat. There's a new book on Breasted that tells this story. At the entrance to the Oriental Museum is this image, and it's called East Meets West. And you see here images of ancient Egypt. You see the Sphinx here in the pyramids. You see the sun disk of the Aten, the Ankh. And the ancient Egyptians, white Egyptians, are giving their knowledge to modern man, Western man. East meets West. So it's an acknowledgement that Western culture and civilization, many aspects of Western culture and civilization, originated in the Nile Valley. So what all of this has resulted in is what I refer to today as Afrophobia, anti-African sentiments. It's a perceived fear or hatred of the cultures and peoples of Africa, as well as Africans in the diaspora. What we're witnessing right now is the erasure of African history. And so Afrophobia shows up in the United States as opposition to African studies, critical race theory, the revision of slave history, opposition to DEI, and what some people refer to as wokeness, as if it's all right being asleep, dumb, and ignorant. Afrophobia also shows up in Egypt, and I've seen it worsen over the past 3 years. It's worse now than it's ever been before. It has showed up last year alone, as opposition to Afrocentricity, opposition to Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart was to do a concert in Carver last February, and they shut him down because he supposedly did an interview, which I have not been able to find anywhere, an interview where he said that his ancestors were kings and queens in Egypt. And because of that statement, they shut him down. Netflix last June produced a documentary on Cleopatra, and they dared to depict Cleopatra as a mixed-race woman of color. The Egyptian government went crazy and refused to show that documentary. As a matter of fact, there was an attorney in Cairo who sued Netflix for $100 million. Of course, that suit went nowhere, and then Zahir Was created an Egyptian documentary that depicted Cleopatra as a white woman. In July of last year, Travis Scott, who's homeboy, he's from Texas, right? They canceled his concert at the pyramids. Why? Because he was Afrocentric. Now, Travis Scott is the least African-centered person on the planet. Donald Trump is more Afrocentric than Travis Scott. This Negro is out of his mind. But they canceled him because he was African-centered, which is nonsense. This stuff has gotten out of control. And what I can tell you based on my own personal experiences, that the anti-African sentiments that we're seeing in Egypt right now is the direct result of anti-African sentiments that we see in the United States of America. As a matter of fact, they're being funded by the same sources. And this thing has gotten so bad that last year, the Egyptian government, the Supreme Council of Antiquities, banned the Metropolitan Museum and the Leiden Museum in Amsterdam for two exhibitions which they claim were Afrocentric. This thing has gotten out of control. It really has. So, Dr. Clark, John Henry Clark, said that if you expect present-day school systems to teach your history, African history, and teach it correctly, you're dreaming. That's not going to happen. It's never happened. Powerful people cannot afford to educate the people that they oppress. Education is for liberation. And you cannot expect your oppressor to teach you how to liberate yourself. The Chinese people don't go out into the world begging school systems to teach Chinese history. The Japanese don't do that. Jews don't do that. What do? They teach their history themselves. And that's what conscious people should do. And quiet as it's kept. That's what black folk did before integration. We had our own schools, in our own segregated communities. We had teachers who looked like us, who cared about the well-being of every child in that classroom and made sure that you could read, you could write, you can reason, so that you can go out into the world and make something of yourself and make your community proud. That's what education is supposed to do. But that's gone now. That's gone. So, I want to share with you, and I want to be aware of the time, but I want to share with you 13 facts that people who are opposed to this type of presentation want you to forget. 13 facts. The first one is that art shapes consciousness. And because of my training, my background in art, design, and advertising and marketing, I understand the value of images, the power of images, and how images shape consciousness. I want to share with you my interpretation of some of the art in front of the U.S. Customs House in Lower Manhattan. This building was constructed in 1907, and there are four statues at the entrance to this building that represent the four continents: Asia, America, Europe, and Africa. I want to focus on three: America, Europe, and Africa, and show you these images, which were carved by Daniel Chester French, who was the go-to sculptor in early America. He was responsible for creating over 250 public works of art, which adorn government buildings throughout the United States of America. Right? So here's the entrance to the U.S. Customs House. Here are the statues of America and Europe, and you see depictions of women, because all of the continents are named after women. Symbolically, metaphorically, women, well, realistically, women give birth to people. Women represent nationhood and the people of certain nations. So artistically, it makes sense to use the image of a woman to represent a continent. a nation, culture, and civilization, right? So we see America is depicted as a woman. She's holding a torch in her hand. The torch is symbolic of light. Light is a metaphor for knowledge, similar to the Statue of Liberty in New York City, holding a torch, right, representing the light of the world. She's holding in her lap sheaves of corn, which represents America's ability to feed herself, feed her nation. Next, we see Europe, who is represented by Minerva. Minerva is the Roman goddess of wisdom, knowledge, and warfare. Minerva was victorious in every single battle. So we see Minerva is wearing the breastplate of a warrior. She represents Roman history, Roman culture, Roman imperialism, hence the eagle above her shoulder. But I want you to take notice of her left hand. Her left hand is resting on a book, and a book symbolizes knowledge. I want you to note, too, that that book is open. So an open book represents the application of knowledge. I want you to note also that that open book is resting on a globe, the world, which symbolizes Rome's ability to use their knowledge to conquer and control the world. Does that make sense? Can you all see that? Okay. So let's now look at Africa. U.S. Customs House. Africa is new. And not only is she new, she is unconscious. And unconsciousness symbolizes being asleep or dead, which is what the word Negro represents. Someone who is mentally dead. Africa is unable to defend herself. She looks as though she's been ravished. She's been raped, and she has. The mineral resources, the gold, the diamonds, the cobalt, have been taken out of Africa for centuries. The people of Africa have been stolen and taken out of Africa for 444 years. That's real. So Africa is dead. Africa is unconscious. Africa is unable to defend herself, her resources, or her people. This is in front of the U.S. Customs House in New York City right now. Now, as insulting as this depiction is, but I want you all to know that what is even more important are the images behind these three statues. And I guarantee you that 99.9% of the people who visit this building and go in and out of this building have never looked behind these statues. So do you want to see what's behind these statues? Yeah. Let me get a drink of water. My throat is parched. So, behind the statue of Africa, see, here is a sphinx-like head that you see here, and behind that image is a shadowy figure. And this shadowy figure is a thief. He's cloaked, and he's holding something in his hand. And what I submit to you, brothers and sisters, is what he has stolen is the knowledge of Africa. And as a result of the theft of that knowledge, Africa is in darkness. Africa is asleep. Africa is unconscious. Africa is dead. Let's look behind Europe. Behind Minerva, what do you see? You now see that thief is in Europe. You see that? That cloaked figure is now in Europe. And what is that cloaked figure doing? Reading a book. Reading and studying the knowledge that was stolen out of Africa. The same knowledge that Minerva is using to control the world. Let's look behind America. You see the thief now, and the covers have been pulled off. So he's now free to move beyond North America, South America, Central America. I didn't make this up. All I'm doing is interpreting what is there. Does this make sense? Okay. So let's move forward. It's here. Good. All right. So, So you all recognize this building? Good. Because the thing is, once you understand African history and culture and the symbols associated with African history and culture, you can go anywhere in the world and reclaim your historical and cultural memory. So my hotel is at the Sonesta, and I decided I wanted to walk over to the Alamo to see if I could find Pee Wee Herman's bicycle, right? It wasn't there. There's no basement. Been lied to again, Lord have mercy. So as I was walking down the street, I saw this building. And because I have a background in architecture, and if I can be accused of anything, I can be accused of being too observant. I see everything. I want to understand everything around me. And I saw that building, and something caught my eye. Something caught my eye. I said, what have we here? Huh? So what are you seeing in this image? You see Africa is prominent. Now, this morning I was talking to some students and some elders, and I shared with them, is anybody here today who was here this morning? Brother in the back? Okay. So, what did I say about the origins of humanity? Do you remember? All right. It all started in Africa. But I referenced the source. I don't talk about anything that I can't document, right? Do you remember the name of the institution I referenced? You don't. Young lady, do you remember? Okay, that's okay. That's why you have to come and hear me speak multiple times so the information can sink in. I referenced, I live in D.C., so you all have heard of the Smithsonian Institute, right? In the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, there's an exhibition in the David Koch Hall of Human Origins. David Koch, of the Koch brothers, spent $15 million on this exhibition, which is about 15 years old. I shared with the students this morning what I will share with you all right now. So this is not Tony Browder saying this. This is Tony Browder sharing with you information that's in the David Koch Hall of Human Origins in the Smithsonian. In that exhibition, it says 300,000 years ago, Africans were the only people on the planet. And that 60,000 years ago, these Africans in Northeast Africa began walking out of East Africa into Asia and populated Asia. It goes on to say that 40,000 years ago, another group of people from East Africa walked into Western Asia, the landmass that we now call Europe, and populated Europe. So let's just take these three facts and process for a minute. The first people on the planet were who? Africans. And how long ago did they live? 300,000 years ago. And they were the only people on the planet. And then these Africans walked into Asia, what time frame? 60,000 years ago. And they walked into Europe, how long ago? 40,000 years ago. So the first people in Asia were who? Africans. The first people in Europe were who? Africans. That's a historical fact. And the other fact that's not talked about is how Africans in Asia and Africans in Europe speciated and became the people who now dominate those lands. That's another lecture in and of itself. But it's a commonly accepted fact that African DNA, African mitochondrial DNA, is the oldest DNA on the planet. And that every person on this planet carries within their bodies the mitochondrial DNA of a African woman, which can be traced back to her descendants in Northeast Africa to this very day. So what that means, simply stated, it means that there's no such thing as race. Race is a false construct that was created by racists in order to divide humanity into colors and assign the lowest marker of intelligence to people with the greatest amount of melanin in their skin. There's no such thing as race. There's only one race, the human race, which is of African origin. But there is such a thing as racism. And that's what we've been dealing with for over 400 years. If racism wasn't true, we'd be having this conversation under a mango tree somewhere in Africa right now. Right? So we see here Africa, and we see rays coming out of Africa. We see, metaphorically, Adam and Eve, the first man and woman, coming out of Africa. And then we see over here America. His arm is resting on America, and the woman here is holding in her hand five-pointed star that represents the state of Texas, right? So people always depict their history and culture. And what is she doing? She is reading a book, studying the knowledge of the world. He's holding a papyrus scroll in his hand, studying knowledge. So remember this image about knowledge being stolen out of Africa, taken into Europe, and being used to control the world? You see it right here. America holds a torch, he's holding a torch. Light and illumination, knowledge. The same image above the Oriental Institute, East meets West. That's what you see here, East meets West. So the truth is hidden in plain sight. But if you don't know history, you won't know what you're looking at. That's why education is so critically important. So point number 2, film is propaganda. I'm so pleased that Sister Ada is involved in films, and that I'm pleased that she's giving us an opportunity to showcase Runoko Rashidi's documentary tomorrow, because film has been used as a means of propaganda. I want to share with you a couple of examples as we move onward. There have been 18 films about Cleopatra, beginning in 1899 to the present day. And all these Cleopatras are white. Last year, Netflix dared to produce a story about Cleopatra, presenting Cleopatra as a mixed race person. Now, if you truly understood the history of the Greek presence in Kemet, or Egypt, then ancient Kemet, like many African nations, is a matrilineal nation, which means that the bloodline is passed on, is determined by the woman. So in Kemet, every mother, African mother, determined the African king. So when the Greeks came into Kemet, they followed this same tradition. The Greek rulers, i.e. European rulers, married African women so that their children would become the legitimate heirs to the throne. So Cleopatra the seventh was the byproduct of this process, which had been taking place for almost 300 years. So technically, Cleopatra was not a white woman, she was mixed race. She was a mulatto. Or if she lived in Texas in 1925, she would be called a Negro. What did Thomas Jefferson say? 1 drop of black blood makes you black? So, why focus on Cleopatra? Cleopatra really was not the most important queen in ancient Egypt. Why focus on Cleopatra? Focus on Cleopatra because this is during the time of the Greek occupation of Egypt. Let's go back in time when Egypt was Kemet. Let's go to the 18th dynasty. This is Queen T. Queen T, she was one of the most powerful rulers in the world. If you come to Egypt, go to the Cairo Museum, the largest statue in the Cairo Museum is the statue of Queen T and her husband, Amenhotep III. An African power couple. You thought Barack and Michelle were bad? They could have taken lessons from them. This is the 18th dynasty. But you never see these images. They would never show you these images on television or in documentaries or in films. So let's just look at this one family. Their son is Amenhotep IV, who changed his name to Akhenaten. There's a statue of him in the Carver Museum, and I swear this brother looks just like Lionel Richie. I mean, so he is the son of this African couple, and his son is somebody that you all know, but you never see him depicted as an African. That's because the history of Black Africa has been hijacked. It's been hijacked. Film is propaganda. Another example is a film that many of you all have grown up watching, The Mummy, right? Boris Karloff is The Mummy, right? There have been dozens of mummy movies since 1932. And those films continue to be made in the 21st century. Now, the thing that offended me once I began to learn African history is how they distort African history. Does anybody remember the name of the mummy? Imhotep. And who is Imhotep? Father Medicine, but he's also the person responsible for designing the step pyramid at Saqqara, the first building of stone, a 19-story skyscraper that is still standing today. There's a phenomenal book written by Robert Bauval and Thomas Brophy, two Europeans, that tells the history. It's one of the best books written on Imhotep, and it's correctly referred to as Imhotep the African, the architect of the universe. He was the prime minister of the king Zoser. He was a philosopher. He was a poet. He's the person who gave us the statement, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you would die. And he's also acknowledged as the father of medicine. Not Hippocrates, but Imhotep is the father of medicine, and he lived at least 2,000 years before Hippocrates. These are historical facts that folk don't know about. Film is propaganda, and the Africanists strike back. Right? So this is an image that was created during the time of the Roman occupation of Egypt. Guess who this is? This is Asar. This is how the Romans perceived Asar, the founding father of ancient Kemet. They portrayed him as an African because they respected that ancient history, just as the Greeks did. They respected that ancient history. But there was a film that came out a couple of decades ago called The Gods of Egypt, and all of the gods of Egypt were depicted as white. All of the gods of Egypt were depicted as white, except for one. Chad Boseman was offered a role in this film, and he took it because Chad Boseman went to Howard. And while he was a student at Howard, he worked at a black bookstore two blocks down from Howard University, and he sold black books. He read black books. He read my books. He read Dr. Welsing's books. He read Asa Hilliard's book. He read John Jackson's books, so he knew his history. So he knew when he saw this script that the script was flawed, but he wanted to at least depict one true African god of Egypt. He had some integrity. So you have Heru or Horus and Set depicted as non-African people in this film. Another example, film is propaganda, the Africanists strike back, Black Panther. So Chad Boseman was ultimately offered a role as a Black Panther, and he said, he's a student at Howard, graduated from the College of Fine Arts, where I graduated from, and I'm so proud to say that Howard, 3 years ago, named the College of Fine Arts in honor of Chad Boseman. Right? Ryan Coogler, one of the baddest directors in Hollywood. Young brother was born and raised in Oakland, California. His parents were former Black Panthers. His parents read African history, had a library of African books. Chad Boseman grew up learning his history. Thus, when Disney gave him a budget of $100 million to write the script for Black Panther and to direct Black Panther, he took their money and used that film to tell a story about African history. So Chad Boseman and Michael B. Jordan, their characters were a retelling of the Asarian drama, where Chad played Heru and Michael B. Jordan played Set. All right? battling each other for control of their father's kingdom. It's the Assyrian drama for the 21st century. Brilliant piece of writing. And that film, that movie, made $1.3 billion. It was the third film that Ryan Coogler made. So Ryan Coogler, with this one film, has become the most successful black writer and director in Hollywood history. Grounded in history, grounded in his culture, and produced the most successful film a black writer or director ever made. So that's the power of knowing who you are and having the courage to tell your story creatively. It's got to be entertaining, right? But you can always find ways to tell your story. So if you remember the opening scene of Black Panther, you see the first king was led to the heart-shaped herb by this Black Panther. Anybody remember this Black Panther's name? Bast. Bast. It's Bast. B-A-S-T. And who is Bast? Bast is a figure that came straight from the Nile Valley. So Ryan Coogler again incorporated elements of comedic history in this film. But if you don't know the history, it went over your head. It went over your head, but it's there. Film is propaganda. African Strike Back. Ptah versus the Oscar. Everybody knows what that statue is, right? The Oscar, the highest award given by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Would you believe me if I told you that the inspiration for that statue is an ancient African image? Where's my evidence? There it is. That's, oops, there it is. Oops, there it is, okay. That is Ptah. Ptah is the patron saint of artists and craft persons in ancient Kemet. Ptah was the inspiration behind Imhotep designing the first building known to mankind. Huh? So your history is everywhere, hidden in plain sight. And once you know it, you can reclaim your ancestral legacy anywhere you go. So, Ptah was the inspiration behind the construction of the step pyramid at Saqqara. So, you know, I see a Black Panther Oscar. The movie Black Panther was nominated for 7 Oscars and won 3. It was nominated for more Oscars than any other black film in history. And that one film won more Oscars than any singular black film in history. And we need to understand how this happened. It didn't happen by happenstance. If you understand the significance of ancestors and libation, this is evidence of the ancestors' hand in helping to reveal certain truths. Why? Because it's time for these truths to be revealed. So, I want to talk briefly about the Ace of Restoration Project. This is a project that I've dedicated the last 14 and a half years of my life to, something that I fell into, nothing that I ever planned to do. It was an opportunity that presented itself. And when the opportunity came, I was ready. We have, for the past 14 years, been responsible for funding the first archaeological excavation in Egypt funded by people of African ancestry in the history of Egyptological excavation. We started off in 2008 funding the excavation, conservation, and restoration of 3 Kushite tombs. And at the end of last season, we're now up to 44 tombs. We have made some incredible discoveries, and as a result of these discoveries over the last 14 years, we are literally in a position now to rewrite the history of all of Egypt. So here's a photograph that was taken in 2010 as we were excavating the primary tomb, the temple tomb of a priest, 25th dynasty priest by the name of Karakamen, who worked at Karnak Temple. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but this is an actual photograph. We completed the excavation of the first Pillar Hall, and we started in July of that season, beginning to excavate in the second Pillar Hall. We literally have excavated 2,700 tons of debris. And in the process of excavating this tomb, we found over 34,000 fragments, pieces as small as my thumb, other pieces as big as an automobile. Each fragment has to be cleaned, has to be labeled, has to be photographed, has to be numbered and cataloged. And then, after we completed the excavation of this tomb, we began the process of putting this tomb back together. It's been phenomenal work that has radically changed my life, right? So, as we excavate these tombs, as I said earlier, we started off with 3 tombs. As of last year, we now have over 43 tombs. And we have found over 115 bodies of ancestors. So as we find these bodies, we can now reconstruct the stories of these people. We find their names, we find other artifacts that were buried with them, and we can tell their story. So now we're in a position to tell the story of 3 people. Karakamin's brother, Harold Marquette, Karabashkin, who was the mayor of Waset, and Nesbonedjed. These are all priests, Kushite priests of the 25th dynasty, who worked at Karnak Temple on the east bank of the Nile River. Karnak Temple is the largest temple complex ever built by humans on the planet. Wow. The largest religious complex on earth. And these 4 African men, these 4 Kushite men, were responsible for managing this entire complex. This is the 25th dynasty, around 700 BC. This is African history. This is world history. These men, their ancestors, they came from Kush. And these are the ruins of the pyramid fields in Kush, modern-day Sudan. Did you know that there are more pyramids in Kush than there are in Egypt? There's over 400 of these structures in Kush. And all of them have the tops knocked off. All of them have been destroyed. And the reason why they were destroyed is because of an Italian soldier of fortune named Giuseppe Fellini, who came into Kush, broke into a tomb of a Kushite queen, found gold and silver and other artifacts, and then wrote a book about his exploits. And that book was first written in Italian and then translated to French, German, and English. And in that book, he lied and said that these Kushite kings and queens buried their gold in the top of their pyramids. So once this book was published, you had other tomb robbers from France, England, Germany, all over Europe descended on Sudan and knocked the tops off of all of these pyramids looking for gold and silver and precious minerals. That's real. And Reisner was one of them. As I'm winding down, okay, I saw Ada a minute ago. I thought she was going to give me a time check. So I can finish up within the next 10 minutes. So point number 8, libation and ancestral acknowledgement. One of the most significant aspects, oh, there she is. We good? On time? Okay, so we found 43 tombs at our site. And we can now identify this site as the largest Kushite settlement in Luxor. It's phenomenal. Most of what we found, we haven't even talked about publicly yet. We haven't even published yet. So over the course of the next 10, 15 years, as more material is produced, we will literally change the world's perception of the 25th dynasty, which is commonly referred to as the Negro dynasty. And if the 25th dynasty is the Negro dynasty, if the 30 dynasties in Egypt, it means that the other 25 dynasties were non-Negro. Huh? That's a terrible game that's been played for far too long. But every new tomb that we discover allows us to discover the name and the identity of a new ancestor. And when we find these tombs, we pour libation and acknowledge these ancestors, because that's what these tombs were for. The whole purpose of building a tomb is so that the living could remember the dead. So you pour libation and call the names of your ancestors one, to acknowledge them, and two, to invite them to be present in your life today. That's African. And you can find that tradition throughout all of Africa, north, south, east, and west. That is African. It's not voodoo, it's not superstition, it's not anti-religious, it's what all conscious people do. And you know what? They do it in America as well. Next month, we're going to have Mother's Day. And if your mother is alive, you wear a red carnation. If she's deceased, you wear a white carnation. Why? Because white is the color associated with death. In June, you have Father's Day, where you honor your male ancestors. And in July, you have what? The 4th of July, where you honor America's founding fathers. You have Memorial Day at the end of May, where you honor those people who died giving their life to defend their nation. So every conscientious people understand the value of honoring their ancestors. It's the civil thing to do. It is uncivilized not to know your ancestors or to honor them. It is uncivilized. So there's a quote from the book of Ani, a 19th dynasty papyrus, that says, "Pour libation for your father and your mother, who rest in the valley of the ancestors. The next rule will witness your action and accept it. Do not forget to do this even when you're far away from home, for as you do for your parents, your children would do for you." So it's about modeling traditions that keep you connected to those who are no longer here. Yes. There's power in that. So one of the other things that I've learned recently as a result of studying the works of Sheikh Agnotology, studying the works of the scholars who studied under him, and other contemporary scholars, African scholars, this is important, because what Sheikh Agnotology, Teofilo Obenga, and other African scholars have done is to look at the connections of Nile Valley culture and civilization to Niger Valley culture and civilization, and they've identified the similarities linguistically, spiritually, artistically, and otherwise. So we now know that there were 6 migrations from the Nile to the Niger between 660 BC and 560 ACE. 6 migrations that have been documented. Very few people talk about, very few people even know about. So I became aware of the significance of this, so just hold on, I'm wrapping up, okay? So in 2016, we had a conference in Egypt, and we visited sites of other archaeologists who were showcasing the work that they were doing. We went over about 2 miles north of where we're working in an area known as North Asasif, which is right near the temple of Hatshepsut, which is like over here in this area, right near the Valley of the Kings. And I visited a tomb that would never be open to the public. You know about that tomb, don't you? Yes. Yep. Visited the tomb that would never be open to the public. And as I said, when I walk into a space, I study every space that I'm in. I'm looking around. And I looked up in the ceiling at the entrance to this tomb, and I saw something that rocked my world. I saw this image. Now, it's kind of hard to see. Let me show you a reproduction of that image. Any Akans here? Anybody know anything about Akan culture, Akan history? So that symbol is known in the Akan culture as the Akoma symbol, which is also known as the Sankofa symbol. So I've been able to document the origin of this symbol in Kush. And it was developed in Kush as late as 1200 BC. So now, understanding that there were migrations from the Nile River Valley to the Niger River Valley, we can now add another piece to the puzzle that will help us reconstruct African memory. So, this concept that I'm working on documents the migration from the Nile to the Niger. So, if African people did migrate from the Nile to the Niger, brought their cargo of knowledge with them over a period of hundreds of years and helped jumpstart cultures and civilization in Ghana, in Senegal, in the Gambia, in Nigeria, right? In Cameroon. And we all know about the Dogon in Mali, right? And the Dogon inherited the astronomical knowledge that came from the Nile Valley. Hence, both of these cultures have a profound appreciation for the star system, the binary star system that they refer to as Potolo and Sigitolo, that we today refer to by its Greek names, Sirius A and Sirius B. We can connect the dots. Yes. All right? Yes. So, if Africans were stolen from West Africa and brought across the ocean to the Americas, what has now been documented, and we're going to be writing about this information, is that genetic studies have been done with West Africans and African Americans in finding elements of Nile Valley DNA in West Africans and African Americans. So we can now genetically trace our ancestry back from the Mississippi, the Potomac, the Hudson, to the Niger, to the Nile. The world is about to change. You all need to get ready for that change. So if you ever watch The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, you know Questlove, the drummer, founder of the Roots, you'll notice that every show he wears this pen. It was a pen that was given to him by his partner, co-creator of the Roots, Black Thought. This is the pen associated with the African burial ground. It's a symbol of Sankofa. And as we know, Sankofa is a Adigma symbol that comes from the Akan in Ghana, West Africa. It is a symbol that means it is not forbidden to go back and reclaim your knowledge of the past. You have a responsibility to know who you were. It's your obligation to reclaim your memory. There's a phenomenal film that came out last year on Netflix called The Descendant that documents the descendants of the last slave ship that came into America after the importation of enslaved Africans was banned in 1808. Phenomenal documentary how these people in Mobile, Alabama created a city named Africa Town. And they're trying to hold on to Africa Town because gentrification is coming. And history is being erased. So, the other reality is we can now trace migrations from the Nile to the Niger to the Potomac. I've lived in Washington, D.C. for the last 52 years. 38 years ago, I created a field trip called Egypt on the Potomac, which I've been able to document the influence of ancient Nile Valley architecture, mythology, symbolism, history, and culture in the layout and design of Washington, D.C. in 1791. I've been doing this activity for 38 years, connecting dots. So let me give you a taste of what we're talking about. The National Museum of African American History and Culture opened in September of 2016. You will find this Sankofa symbol is quite prominent in that museum. And what a journey to that museum teaches us is that we're African not because we were born in Africa. We're African because Africa was born in us. Africa is in our DNA, right? We're not Negroes. We're not colored people. We're not black people. We're African people. Yes, ma'am. All right, she's telling me to wind up. So let me finish this thing up. So, quick interpretation of the architecture of this building. The exterior of the building is called the Corona, and it was inspired by a Yoruba shrine post from Nigeria. 3 inverted triangles was the inspiration for the exterior of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. But also, take note that the angle of the corona is designed to match the angle of the capstone of the Washington Monument. 17 degrees, compared to 73 degrees. So what the architect who designed this building was doing was making a symbolic parallel between West African culture and East African culture, showing the connection between the Nile and the Niger, hidden in plain sight. History hidden in plain sight. So, moving along quickly. Everybody knows this building, right? It's on your $5 bill, right? The Lincoln Memorial. Everybody knows this statue. This statue was created by Daniel Chester French, the same person who created the statues in front of the U.S. Customs House. The same man, right? Daniel Chester French had traveled to Egypt and seen the incredible monuments of Egypt. And he went to Abu Simbel and saw the monuments at Abu Simbel and said, I want to create something like that in America. And that's what Abraham Lincoln represents. Abraham Lincoln was modeled after this image of Ramesses II in Abu Simbel. Here is Abu Simbel. Huh? Imitation is the purest form of flattery, even if you steal it. This is David Adjaye, the Ghanaian British architect who designed the exterior of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. This is, you all know what this is, right? Right? We call it the Washington Monument, but if you take our Egypt on the Potomac field trip, you'll know that it's really a SARS monument, and I can prove that when this building was opened in 1888, it was dedicated to a Sar, first king of Kemet, and not George, first president of the United States. I only talk about what I know, and I always present my evidence to back up what I'm saying. So, the Washington Monument and this reflection pool was copied from the Tekenu, the stand at Karnak Temple, where these Kushite kings had control. As a matter of fact, this sacred lake in Karnak Temple was created by Taharka. No, not Taharka, Shabaka, the third king of the 25th dynasty. Every temple in Kemet had Tekenu. Every temple in Kemet had a reflection pool, a sacred lake. So what we see in Washington, D.C. is nothing but a copy of African architecture. As a matter of fact, David Adjaye said that at its best, architecture is a physical manifestation of a culture's highest ideals. If you're going to steal from someone who has more than you. If you're going to copy from someone who does things better than you do. So, all right, winding down. Give me 3.5 minutes. I talked about this in my first book from the Browder file. The symbols on the Great Seal of the United States of America, the symbols that represent the heart and soul of this nation, are symbols that came straight out of the Nile Valley. The eagle on the front of the Great Seal was taken from the image of Heru, the national symbol of ancient Kemet. Heru, the son of Asar and Aset. The national symbol of Kemet, the national symbol of the United States of America. Because I'm pressed for time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Let me share with you the reverse of the Great Seal on the dollar bill. You all seen this on your money ever since you've been online. Nobody ever asked the question, why is there a pyramid on the back of the dollar bill? Why is there an eye above the pyramid? And when I first wrote the Browder file in '89, I said that it was a pyramid similar to the pyramids at Giza. I was wrong, and I'm willing to admit that. Since I've been to Sudan, I now know that it's a Kushite pyramid. It's a Nubian pyramid. Not a Kemetic pyramid. Not an Egyptian pyramid, because of the angle. The slope of the angle of the Kushite pyramids is different than the slope of the angles of the pyramids built in Kemet. And the eye above the pyramid is the right eye of Heru. Why are these symbols on the back of the dollar bill? We talked about the Washington Monument. Washington Monument is a symbol that represents the resurrection of Asar. Why is that structure in the geographical center of the 10-mile square that was to be the capital for the wealthiest, most powerful nation on the face of the earth? And why don't you know this story? What else don't you know? That's the question that you should be asking yourself. So, learn from the knowledge keepers. John Henry Clark learned from Arthur Schomburg, who wrote an article in 1925 called The Negro Digs Up His Past. I would encourage each and every one of you to Google that article. You can download a PDF of that article right now. It is as relevant today as it was when it was first written in 1925. There's a quote from that article. Schomburg says, "The American Negro must remake his past in order to make his future." That's Sankofa. Go back and fetch the knowledge of your past. We must think more collectively and more retrospectively than others. And we must become the most enthusiastic antiquarian of them all. Antiquarian is a historian. So we must become the greatest historians of all because we have the longest history of any people on the planet. It's natural. So we've got a new exhibition that we're going to be opening in D.C. at our center in September. It's named in honor of John Henry Clark. Take a screenshot of this image. These are books that all of you all should have in your library. If you want to be someone who has a knowledge and appreciation of your past, you have to have these books in your library. And don't just read them, study them. Study them. All right? Knowledge Keepers. Runoko Rashidi. Tomorrow we're going to be sharing with you the documentary that we produced on Runoko Rashidi, who was a knowledge keeper. Followed the traditions of men and women who showed him what it was to be African. This brother traveled to over 130 countries, documenting the African presence before enslavement. You'll see that in the documentary tomorrow, and I hope you all will come out. And guess what? It's free. It's free. Doesn't cost you 1 red cent. Learn the difference between artificial intelligence and ancestral intelligence. A whole lot of conversation now about AI. A lot of people getting bent out of shape. One simple story I'll share with you is that the reason why black folk, former Negroes, former colored people, African Americans, the reason why we're still alive today is because of our ancestors. That's the only reason that we're still alive today. So know this, take a picture of this too. Ancestral intelligence is knowing that we carry the genetic memory of 10,000 times 10,000 ancestors within us. We carry their memory in our DNA. And when you know that, you can call on Big Mama. You can call on Junebug. You can call on folk for help, for protection, for inspiration. That's what they're there for. And if you call them, if you invite them, if you pour libation and invite them to come, they will come because you are the reason that they live. So the National Museum of African American History and Culture, if you go to that museum, if you understand what it really is, it's more than a museum because it has the artifacts of thousands and thousands of Africans free and enslaved who lived and died. And every artifact that a person has, the houses that they lived in, the clothing that they wear, contains their spirit. Yes. So this is more than a museum. This is a shrine house. And if you go into this building with the right consciousness, you will be inspired. Inspired, inspirited. Your ancestors will tap you on the shoulder, will whisper in your ear, and make you realize something that you didn't even know existed. That's what they do. That's what they're there for. So, the last thing is seek knowledge of self 24/7, 365. You can't teach 3,000 years of African history in 1 month. So today is an opportunity to give you a taste of African history, just a taste. Tomorrow we'll give you another taste. And what you do with all this information is left up to you. And the quality of life of your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren will be determined by what you do with this knowledge. That's it. I'm done. Thank you very much. Sorry for